From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Ahead today from the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Jim Robb with this week's cattle market commentary. He'll talk about, among other things, what he expects to see in the USDA's latest Cattle on Feed report coming out this Friday. Then K-State's Allen Featherstone will look at Kansas farm profitability trends over the past few years as a harbinger of what that profitability may look like here in 2018. The main difference maker there, says Allen, a producer's ability to effectively manage costs of production. And later this week's forage segment, K-State's Andrea Feldkamp will talk about the new Forage Family and Consumer Sciences Judging Contest Format. All this and more next on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Our first offer is the cattle market overview, and joining us for that is Jim Robb. Jim is the director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center. That's based in Denver, as you know, and a project that K-State and numerous other land-grant universities co-sponsor. Jim, we'll get into a number of things, including what's ahead in the form of the USDA Cattle on Feed report this Friday, but taking a look at the trades this past week, the fed cattle trade remained ill-defined deep into the end of the week. And then at the very last gasp on Friday afternoon late, some trade broke loose, and the end result, a market that was roughly $3 higher. So a decent move to the upside there.
And that kind of came in the face of some mixed signals. The wholesale beef market was softer clearly for the week, down about $3.72 a hundredweight on that choice beef cutout. But the futures markets were stronger. The fed cattle market, if we look at the average of the daily closes for the week, was up nearly $3.50 for the week from the prior week's level, and the feeder steers were up about $2.75. So it was a bit difficult to sort out even towards the end of last week.
If anything else, feedlots feel like they've got some leverage right now.
I think they do. You know, some people have said the kill levels have not been large enough, but really, we ran 7% above a year ago. So, you know, the number of head being processed is adequate. We've had some cold weather. The weights are certainly in check. And I think the feed yards are kind of in a position where, especially with the futures rebound this past week, that they could maybe look for a little bit stronger money. But we've thought that in some recent weeks, too, and it tends to go the other direction sometimes very quickly this time of year. So it's a tough market to call, and one that packers probably do need some animals this next week, given this past week.
Now, in recent weeks, in the cash feeder cattle trade at the auction scene, those prices have been drifting, if not dropping, flat out downward. Last week, as you look at the Kansas bids, a pretty nice bounce back there, Jim.
We saw a rebound, especially in the Kansas feeder cattle market, but in contrast, Oklahoma City was off by about the same amount. So kind of depends on where you are and what the demand is for feeder cattle, but I would say overall it was about a flat market, which, given the uncertainty on the fed cattle side, et cetera, was still holding together rather well on especially those heavier weight feeder cattle.
So really it would be too early to declare that the feeder market has righted itself for an extended time. It's still in a state of flux, it sounds.
I think it really is, Eric. You know, we have feed yards that have aggressively placed in recent months, and they're getting to be picky buyers, but still interested in buying animals.
The USDA's Cattle on Feed report due out this Friday. What's the general tone of expectations there?
Well, kind of like in recent months, there's a lot of uncertainty on placements, and people are going to look at that number very closely. Our number is placements down 3% from a year ago. Now, a year ago in December, those would be the December numbers, we had very large placements. In fact, the largest for any December since 2010. And so we're comparing to a fairly big number last year. But this number could come in even slightly above a year ago. There's some real mixed signals out there, especially in the Southern Plains, about how many animals entered. Marketing's remained aggressive, although when we see the numbers come across from the USDA, they'll be down 1 to 2% from a year ago, but we have one less slaughter day than last year. So daily average marketings were still up year over year, maybe not quite as robust as they have been, but still an adequate marketing rate, even though it'll come in 99% of a year ago. That'll leave us an on-feed inventory up 8% year over year, Eric, and that's kind of in line with the prior month. That's a lot of cattle to work through. That'll be the largest on-feed inventory since January 1, 2012. So it's not a number we've never seen before, but it's been several years, 6 years fully, that we've had that kind of inventory number in commercial feedlots on January 1. So it's a report people will look at carefully again, especially that placements and the placement weight breakdown. One other critical thing in this report, I think that myself and other analysts will look at very quickly, is this will provide the quarterly, what they call the breakdown by class of the animals on feed, and that's the breakdown of steers versus heifers on feed. And this is really critical. How many of the recent placements, the year-over-year increases, have been heifers versus steers? And so when we start looking further ahead in the market implications, that proportion of heifers on feed, if it remains as it has in recent months, well above a year ago, that does point us in the direction of a moderating rate of herd growth.
And that really is the key there, that heifer number will be indicative of whether we are, in fact, seeing any notable level of herd expansion or not.
Yeah, and I think it really is a major barometer as we look ahead to the next 6 months to 2 years.
So, Cattle on Feed report, again, out this Friday from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. A couple of other things here, Jim, and it was a news item that came out late last week. A major cattle feeding entity in the U.S., Five Rivers Cattle Feeders, has been sold by JBS SA to an investment firm on the East Coast, and this includes some 11 feedlots, one of those located in southwest Kansas, and the numbers that are represented by those 11 feedlots, 900,000 cattle, something of that ilk. This transaction, is it significant in regard to the flow of cattle and the overall circumstances of the cattle market?
Certainly in terms of magnitudes, Eric, this is the largest cattle feeding operation in the United States. And this was part of the JBS divestiture plan, and they've really now completed that, over $2 billion worth of divestiture. The feedlot sold for $200 million. That's probably in line. There were none of the cattle were included in that transaction, so it's the feedlots plus some of the feed inventory. And that's fairly close to what Cargill sold some lots last year at. So it seems to be about a market price. The management team, in terms of running the feedlots, the CEO, stays in place. And then, even though this is an East Coast group, they have partnered with the two other groups, and there's quite a bit of industry expertise in some of the facilitating partners in this new ownership group, and in terms of the cattle industry and feeding cattle. So we don't see any disruptions in the industry. This seems to be a well-capitalized group of three led by Pinnacle. So I don't think it'll feed back negatively into the feeder cattle market. They did sign, according to the media reports, a long-term marketing arrangement with JBS, and so that's fairly common amongst the very large feed yards, and that helps supply JBS with cattle, very similar to them owning the feedlot. So it's a major transition. It's part of the adjustments in the JBS asset sphere, but we think this will be a very smooth transition in terms of from an industry perspective.
All right. And one further thing, and this will be appearing, you say, soon on the LMIC.info website. You and your team there have cranked up some information on the hay and forage markets. What will you be posting, Jim?
Well, we're watching the hay and forage markets pretty closely. We've had a very severe winter in much of the U.S., and we were a bit surprised by USDA's final numbers for U.S. hay production. They came in about 1% lower than their prior estimates, but if we look at some states like Kansas, it came in fully 3% below a year ago, and a smaller number in terms of hay production. And then we combine that with another USDA report, which is the December 1 survey of hay stocks across the United States. And that number came in quite a bit lower than expectations. In fact, it came in as the lowest number for December 1 since the very drought-impacted year of 2012. And so these hay stocks are very tight, and as we look ahead with the winter feeding, our estimate is that come the new hay crop year, which most of the U.S. starts on May 1st, that these hay stocks will be historically rather tight, especially if we keep feeding as much hay due to the winter conditions as we have in the last 4 to 6 weeks. So the hay prices in most markets are up above a year ago. And then when we look ahead to next year, USDA doesn't show much increase in acres, and the cow herd is clearly growing. So the supply per animal, in a sense there, Eric, is going to remain rather tight. And we actually see year-over-year increases in the new crop year beginning in 2018, probably year-over-year increases in hay prices. And that's in contrast to much of the other crop sector. But it's something we need to watch closely in the cattle business because we do have some dryness in major areas of the U.S., and if we have any of that adds on here when we start with tight hay stocks, that can lead to some real quick upswings in prices and lack of availability. So I think it's something we'll be watching fairly closely and closer than we have in recent years.
And producers, likewise, will be doing the same. The prospect of hay prices climbing even further here in 2018, especially if it stays as dry as some are suggesting. LMIC.info has that and a load of other valuable information for you cattle producers to have a look at, LMIC.info. As always, Jim, thanks for your input and comments, and we'll catch up with you again soon.
It's been my pleasure, Eric.
He directs the Livestock Marketing Information Center, does Jim Robb, and he's with us regularly to talk cattle market trends on Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. Welcome back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and there is so much consternation, if you will, about the state of the agricultural economy as we go into 2018 and just what the realities are as we hope for improved times on the farm and ranch in this next calendar year. An individual who's put quite a bit of thought into that very question is with us now. He's the head of the Department of Agricultural Economics here at Kansas State University, Allen Featherstone. As you would put it, generally speaking, Allen, where do we stand? Because there seems to be a lot of pessimism out there right now.
Yeah, certainly as we close 2017 and as farmers are finishing up their final numbers for 2017 and looking ahead to 2018, I think we're still in a stage where we're struggling. And in some respects, I think we're seeing more of a dichotomous nature with regards to the production agricultural sector. Probably the most widely cited numbers out there are the net farm income by USDA. And in terms of if you look at their numbers, they argue that 2017 probably was a little bit better than 2016. I think probably the big thing that really, when you look at national numbers, I think you really need to look at the heterogeneity, the fact that while they put out an estimate, there's a lot of variability around that estimate where some producers are actually doing worse or much worse and others are doing about the same and others actually improved. And so what we ended up doing is taking a look at Kansas farms over 3 years. And so we had 760 farms where we had 3 consecutive years from the Kansas Farm Management Association. And just to give a little bit of an indication of where we are, in 2014, 19% of those farms actually had negative net farm income, 1 in 5. If we look at 2015, essentially 42.7% had negative income, roughly 2 in 5. And then essentially in 2016, it actually was a little bit better in Kansas with the high yields, and we actually ended up with about 35% or 1 in 3 that had negative net farm income. And so certainly if that was just a distribution where some years you were high, some years you were low, it would be a different situation than farms that have consecutive negative net farm incomes. To give a little bit of an indication, 1 in 5 farms in Kansas had negative net farm income in 2015 and 2016. And so essentially this is going to be a compounding effect in that when you begin to have consecutive years of negative net farm income, it really begins to have a compounding effect in terms of what's going on with the farm finances. In terms of looking at the positive side, essentially 44% of those farms had positive net farm income for those 2 years. And so that's kind of where we're getting a dichotomous nature is essentially you had 1 in 5 that have had consecutive years, 15 and 16 of negative, and roughly 2/5 that have had positive incomes over those 2 years. And so, again, you're beginning to see a separation in terms of just where farms are with their overall operation. You go back a third year, and essentially 2014, if we can remember back that far, was really a good year. And so there's only 7% of the farms in Kansas that have lost money for 3 years, and roughly 40% that have had 3 consecutive years of net farm income through these difficult times.
We'd like to visit about the difference makers then, as you say, that there have been those that have prospered in the last couple of years and those that have struggled. Noting that the 2017 numbers from the Farm Management Association are not yet in, but if you were to speculate, would we see similar trends continue through those numbers?
Again, I think we're going to see a very differential basis, and there's really probably 2 drivers in terms of what's going to affect the 2017 situation. Mm-hmm. The one is cost of production. Those farms that are able to do a little bit better on the cost of production, essentially spend a little bit less per acre in order to increase that efficiency, certainly that's going to be positive. And we've seen differential effects there. For example, on the corn enterprise from 2014 to 2016, essentially we dropped about $45 per acre with regards to the cost of production. And so certainly that's decreased. But if you look at the soybean and the wheat enterprise, we've been pretty flat. Again, and part of this probably was the price of fertilizer actually has decreased, and corn uses so much fertilizer relative to the other crops. But certainly looking at that cost of production is very important. I think the other thing certainly is yield. Weather was very variable in Kansas like it is pretty much every year, and there's parts of the state that had above average and in some cases maybe even near to record yields. And then there's other places in the state that had poor yields and much below average yields. And so that if you're able to reduce your cost of production and if you were in those areas where yields were good, the incomes probably will be okay in 2017. But certainly there's places in the state where the yields just were not that good last year, and so those producers will probably suffer some more disappointment when the 2017 numbers on their operations in terms of income are finalized.
So then, as we look to this new year, 2018, cost of production, a pivotal matter, yields, in the case of crop production, those two will still carry the day as we look to this new year?
Yeah, certainly they will. And if you look at on a statewide basis in terms of just thinking about 2017 in terms of the projected yields and what that may do kind of on the average, the expected yield for corn in terms of USDA numbers for Kansas were 136 bushel per acre. It was 142 in 2016. Sorghum, 80 in 2017, 91 in 2016. Soybeans, 40 in 17, 48 in 2016. And then wheat, 47 in 2017, and 2016 it was 57. And so if you consider the yields are not that bad from a historical perspective in Kansas in 2016, but we're coming off such a good year in 2016. And so while the yields held up pretty well in 2017, if you look at all those numbers and kind of put them together kind of with expected price from year to year, essentially the crop revenue for Kansas, the gross revenue on those 4 crops, corn, sorghum, soybeans, and wheat, essentially is likely have fallen from 7.1 in 2016 to 6.4 billion in 2017. And so that's an expectation of a decrease of about 10% in revenue. And so that's where, in some respects, unless the livestock enterprises offset that or the cost reductions were able to offset some of that, it does appear that on average 2017 for the Kansas ag economy, when the books are finally tallied, will be a little bit worse than 2016. If you compare it to other states, I did the same analysis for Illinois. Essentially, their revenue basically fell by 2%. And so, again, it's very differential across the Midwest and very differential from farm to farm.
So, again, what a producer individually can do to make the best of the situation. Yields, there is some level of control there, although the weather is still the dominant influence. But managing those costs and general management along that line, that's going to be the difference maker for most producers in 18 as well.
Certainly it is. In terms of when prices are low, the cost structure a lot of times means the difference between those that have a little bit of profit and those that have some loss. When prices are good, essentially there's still that distribution, but everybody is having that positive net farm income when the sector is doing well. Mm-hmm. And probably the other thing I think that producers probably need to think about again in 2018 is really looking at their liquidity, their working capital. Again, working capital is just current assets minus current liabilities. And to give you an indication, from 2015 to 2016, that fell by about $46,000. And if you put that on a percentage basis, it's about 20-25%. And so the average Kansas farm used about a quarter of their working capital. And so certainly working with the bankers, looking at how we can get our costs spread out and reduced, looking at things like rental rates and those types of things are all things that I think producers want to consider as they're making plans for the spring crops in 2018.
And most producers are leaning in this direction in their thinking, but being very cautious, very conservative about their maneuvers here with all this in mind, right?
Certainly, it is a time of caution, and again, unfortunately, we're still in this period of belt tightening and kind of looking at what we need to do to position ourselves when times do get better. They will get better in Kansas agriculture, but I think the big thing is just thinking about how you can position your farm such that it's ready to take advantages of the opportunities that will come in the future.
Allen, it's helpful insight as you've shared it with a number of audiences, including our lawmakers on Capitol Hill, as a matter of fact, recently. And we appreciate you coming over and passing along the general gist of this. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
He's the head of the Agricultural Economics Department here at Kansas State University. And with a look back at what some of the key difference makers have been in farm profitability the last few years, and again, what might be expected to attain the solvency and profitability in this new calendar year 2018. Allen Featherstone with us on this Agriculture Today, and we'll stand aside now for a few minutes, returning with today's agricultural news headlines for you. Also, this week's edition of Tree Tales is still ahead, plus more here on the K-State Radio Network. Please stay with us.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
Agriculture Today continues now here on the K-State Radio Network. Eric Atkinson here. Glad to have you along. Today's agricultural news headlines for you now. These courtesy in part of DTN. Well, like the rest of the federal government, most of the USDA is closed today. However, USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue on Friday outlined a wide range of essential services that will continue to operate. The USDA issued both a news release summary and detailed plans that had been sent to the White House Office of Management and Budget. Some of the biggest problems for farmers would be finishing up or closing a loan tied to the direct USDA funding or a loan guarantee. Loans would start to get processed again once funding is established, but farm programs and loan activities would be put on hold. Now, the same goes for loans under agencies such as the USDA Rural Development. Borrowers there would not be able to secure loans or make payments. The Senate is next scheduled to vote at noon today on a bill to reopen the government. House Speaker Paul Ryan has announced that the House would accept a continuing resolution that extends only until February the 8th. The House-passed continuing resolution extends until February the 16th. However, Democrats are putting pressure on Republicans to deal with issues such as the resolution of the undocumented youth who are protected from deportation under the DACA. The House is scheduled to go into session at noon today as well. Among the USDA agencies and activities that Perdue said will continue, the Food Safety and Inspection Service continues to inspect meat, poultry, and processed eggs. The Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service is still responding in the case of an animal or plant disease outbreak. The U.S. Forest Service will, of course, continue to fight fires and engage in fire suppression. And the Agricultural Marketing Service continues its market news information gathering function. However, after coming in to secure their work areas earlier today, 10,000 or so Farm Service Agency employees are being furloughed, while roughly 182 would remain on staff in various positions. And the U.S. Forest Service has 37,000 employees, of which 23,000 or so are facing furlough. Disaster aid, the Farm Bill, and other possible agenda items are being stalled until the latest budget standoff is resolved. Senator Jerry Moran of Kansas spoke on the Senate floor last week, pointing out that the budget fights end up delaying every other plan for Congress, including discussions of the Farm Bill. He says, quoting the senator, "Certainly it seems the House is further along than the Senate, but having said that, neither one is in a position to get something done immediately." Moran added that, quoting again, "We're going to be bogged down with the appropriations process, and in an agricultural sense, we've got to deal with disaster assistance before we get to a farm bill." As Congress fights over the temporary funding measures, the Farm Bill gets further hung up because of the fate of an $18 billion disaster package for hurricanes, wildfires, and other disasters last year. That disaster bill contains about $2.6 billion in agricultural disaster aid, including specific provisions to help cotton and dairy farmers. That bill would allow cotton farmers to sign up for price loss coverage for cottonseed and change the formula for the Dairy Margin Protection Program. The disaster bill was passed by the House in December, but still requires Senate action. A former USDA Farm Service Agency administrator under the Obama administration, Jonathan Koppas, says that there are a lot of questions about whether Congress can complete the complex piece of Farm Bill legislation in this calendar year. Another continuing resolution until mid-February will back up the calendar further for lawmakers. And general agreement on about 40% of the topics being negotiated in the NAFTA 2.0 talks is in place, according to Mexican ambassador to the U.S., Geronimo Guterres. He says that there's consensus on around 40% of the issues already, as he spoke with Bloomberg Television. And Mexico, he says, may be willing to accept a higher minimum regional content level than the current 62.5%. But on rules of origin, he says they need to be very careful to make sure that they're looked at almost on a product-by-product basis. He also reiterated that Mexico will walk away from the negotiating negotiating table if President Trump were to trigger the NAFTA exit process for the U.S. Indications are the meeting of the top three negotiators, U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, Canadian Foreign Minister Chrystia Freeland, and Mexican Economy Minister Alfonso Guajardo, will now take place January the 29th. That would be a day later than was initially expected. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and now for you the weekly feature from the Kansas Forest Service here at Kansas State University. It's called Tree Tales. And standing by to tell us about an upcoming and important event is K-State Forester Charlie Barden. Charlie?
Conservation Delivery in Changing Times. This will be the theme of the 11th Annual Kansas Natural Resources Conference to be held here in Manhattan for the first time on February 8th and 9th at the Hilton Garden Inn. Following the opening session, there will be over 70 concurrent sessions and poster displays on a variety of Kansas natural resource topics, ranging from fisheries and wildlife to forestry, range, and water quality. Two of my graduate students will be making oral and poster presentations. One is about using satellite images to document the expansion over the last 30 years of red cedar into woodlands in 3 areas of eastern Kansas. My second student will be presenting on documenting the effect of stream bank stabilization practices on erosion and aquatic habitat quality. A trade show featuring various commercial vendors and government agencies will also occur. For further details, go to the KNRC website at www.kansasnrc.org. Registration is just $100 if you sign up by January 15th. It includes a lunch, breaks, and an evening reception. Attendees also receive a 30-page conference proceedings with summaries of each of the presentations and posters. The conference is sponsored by several professional societies and natural resource groups, including the Kansas chapters of these societies: wildlife, fisheries, foresters, soil and water conservation, and range management. The Kansas Grazing Lands Coalition and the Kansas Alliance for Wetlands and Streams also help organize the meeting. Last year, the conference attracted over 300 participants, and the hotel room block filled up. So if you're considering attending, go to the website now at www.kansasnrc.org for the entire schedule, registration, and lodging information. I hope to see you in Manhattan for the Kansas Natural Resources Conference. You've been listening to Tree Tales. I'm Charles Barden, Forester of K-State Research and Extension.
All right, Charlie. Many thanks for that preview. And before we head into the final break, we'd note to you once again that each of our Agriculture Today broadcasts is now available in podcast form for your mobile device or otherwise. Go to ksre.ksu.edu/news. Click on the Radio Network tab, then the Agriculture Today link for instructions for subscribing to that podcast. ksre.ksu.edu/news. And you're listening to Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
You're tuned into Agriculture Today, and as you know, each Monday we talk about what's going on in the Kansas 4-H program, and this week's edition looks at family and consumer sciences judging activities through 4-H here in Kansas, and there'll be a specific event, if you will, coming up, which will focus on, as our guest tells us, the fourth H in 4-H, that being health. Along with us once again is the 4-H Family and Consumer Sciences Program Liaison with K-State Research and Extension, Andrea Feldkamp. So head, heart, hands, health. Those are the 4-H's, and they're all important, but this particular undertaking centers on that last one, right?
That's correct, Eric. And we do pledge when we say the 4-H pledge that we are going to pledge to each of those different areas. And oftentimes, though, health kind of falls in that background. It's more of the ambiguous one, more of the behind the scenes. So this year, we're pledging our health to better living by focusing on the Grand Extension Challenge of Health in our Family and Consumer Science Judging Format.
And we will detail the judging format as you describe it in just a second. But as defined here in this context, what is meant by health?
Yes. So first, I thought we could start with that. So health is defined as a person's physical, mental, and emotional well-being. It can be measured by quality of life, how you grow and develop, and also physical activity. So we are challenging our youth participants this year to look for health components or aspects within their local community. So that could be a number of different places. When you think about health, most people may think of access to food resources or even maybe lighting so that things are not dark. People can navigate roads and sidewalks with ease and not safety concerns. So those are some basic things about health. So this year we thought we're going to take that definition and offer a team approach to a community health contest format. We'll have 2 age divisions. We'll have our intermediates, which is our 9 to 13-year-olds, and then our seniors, which is our 14 and older, and they will form a team. So on a team, they can have a minimum of 2 people per team or a maximum of 4. So they'll pick youth within their same age cohort and create their team. They have to then identify a health issue in their community. So they can scour their community, talk to local adults, youth, others within the community to identify what some potential concerns or problems are, collect information about that issue, talk to them, and put together a potential plan to help solve the problem. So some possible community health problems might be maybe the sidewalks are broken or there aren't available sidewalks. Maybe there aren't any. A path for kids to ride their bikes to and from school needs additional lighting so kids can be safe. Maybe there's a local park or playground, but the equipment isn't able to function because it's broken. Or maybe parents need to be to work before kids can go to school because the school is starting later, so where do the kids go in the meantime? So it can be any number of those in examples and well beyond that, of course. So that's just some ideas of some things that kids could come up with. So the teams will identify their health concern they want to address. They need to do some research, find out why and how long this problem's been going on in their community, and then create a plan to solve it.
And as part of that planning effort, they are to, you say, come up with a video that describes the problem and proposes a solution.
Correct. Now, when most people, adults, I should say, when most adults hear video, they're like panicked. They're like, oh my gosh, that's technical, that's serious, kids can't do that. No, your cell phones have the capability of doing videos, the tablet devices. Kids can do a video very easily and with lots of free applicable software if they so choose to do that. So they'll create a 2 to 4 minute video highlighting the problem that their team has identified and what their plan is to resolve the issue. The intermediate teams will then complete a problem guide, which walks them through some step-by-step instructions on what problem did they develop? Why did they identify this as a problem? How is it a problem? So kind of helps them think through that whole planning process, and they'll submit that with their video entry. The senior teams will actually write a short paper outlining the same various issues that the intermediate teams have identified, but they will also incorporate a reference, and article reference links are being provided to them to choose from. So they don't have to go look for those. Those are being provided for them. The best thing about this is that any local youth that wants to participate, that's a 4-H member, can. So it's not a requirement that only so many teams per unit can do this. Any number of youth that want to participate from each unit can put together a team.
Excellent. This is rather involved, though, and it's going to take some effort on the part of that team. They do have some time before those entries are due for this, you say?
Correct. The video entries will be due May 15th. So they've got 4 months to go ahead and identify what their problem is, develop their video, and complete their proposal, whether it's their problem statement or their paper, depending upon their age division, and they'll submit that. They'll be evaluated then by probably some graduate students in public health, and they will take a peek at those videos and identify the top ones to come on then to State Fair, where they will actually participate in the remainder of the contest experience on Saturday, September 15th.
And what will that entail then?
That contest will entail a speech component, so likely they will need to talk about their video, their problem they identified, and some of the aspects related to that. There will also be an interactive component addressing health and talking about different aspects of community health, so they will participate in that. And then they will get to showcase their video that they've created and other display items that they want to put with it to help people understand the breadth of the problem that they've identified.
And the top teams, you say in each age division, actually will then be rewarded to the degree of following through with their intentions on this project.
Correct. So we've got a plan to solve a problem, right? But often we need time and money. So there's a small grant, $250, that the winning team in each age division, so again our intermediate and then our senior, will enable them to put towards the plan to resolve their problem that they've identified.
So there is follow-through here, which
yes.
is excellent. It is the new format this year of the Family and Consumer Sciences Judging event through Kansas 4-H, and once more it will center on the health aspect, where teams of youth will form and address local health-related issues and problems as they identify those in their locales. Kansas4h.org will have the complete details very soon, as well as your local extension offices. Great idea, Andrea. Thanks for telling us about it right here.
Thank you.
She's the 4-H Family and Consumer Sciences Program Liaison for K-State Research and Extension. That's Andrea Feldkamp. That is this week's Kansas 4-H segment. Our time's away for today, and we appreciate you tuning in. We'll be right back here tomorrow this same time. Hope you will as well. Until then, Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.